On the night of October 24th, 2020, the sky over Shanghai felt heavy, almost suffocating. Inside a brightly lit hall, hundreds of eyes were fixed on a small, wiry man standing behind the podium. Jack Ma, the symbol of success, the pride of a nation, stepped into the spotlight with his familiar, confident smile. His voice carried certainty. His eyes shimmered with belief in every word he was about to say. But no one in that hall, not even Jack himself, knew that this speech would become the turning point of his entire life. 20 minutes later, the world changed. A speech that seemed harmless would shake the foundations of Alibaba. Within 3 days, $37 billion vanished from the market as if it had never existed. International media called it the greatest collapse of the 21st century. But for Jack Ma, the true loss wasn't money, it was the right to speak. The man who once inspired millions, who made the world believe in courage and vision, suddenly disappeared from every camera lens. No tweets, no interviews, no trace, only silence. A thick, heavy silence wrapping around the image of the man once called the king of e-commerce. Yet, this story isn't just about the fall of a billionaire. It's about the price of freedom of speech, the limits of power, and how one man paid for his truth with everything he had built. Some called him arrogant, too bold, too outspoken. Others said he simply saw the future too soon, when the world around him was still trapped in the shadows. Somewhere between genius and rebellion, Jack Ma chose to speak his mind, and lost an empire because of it. That night, Shanghai still glittered under the neon lights, but in a quiet corner of the city, a new era had ended. And the question lingered long after, was Jack Ma truly wrong? Or was he simply living in a time not yet ready to hear the truth? Hangzhou, 1970s, a small city by the Qiantang River, wrapped in fog and poverty, much like the life of a skinny boy named Ma Yun. The world would later know him as Jack Ma. China had just emerged from chaos. Opportunity was scarce. Inside a crumbling home, a tall, frail boy sat hunched over, scribbling English words he had copied from an old notebook. No one could have imagined that this boy, who failed his university entrance exam twice, would one day change global commerce forever. Every morning, Jack rode his rusty bicycle 40 minutes to a hotel downtown where foreign tourists stayed. He had no money, no teacher, no textbooks, only a dream: to speak English with foreigners. They often laughed at his pronunciation, sometimes didn't understand a word he said, but Jack kept talking, kept smiling, kept trying. It was during those misty mornings that a vision began to take shape, that the world was far larger than the narrow streets of Hangzhou. Jack Ma wasn't smart in the conventional sense. He failed high school exams, failed college, was rejected from over 30 jobs, even a KFC waiter position. Everyone said no, but there was one thing no one could take from him: stubbornness. When others said, "It's impossible," Jack asked, "Why not?" When they laughed, he stayed silent and kept going. His first real break came when he became an English teacher. The pay was just $12 a month, but those years taught him the most valuable lesson of all: how to understand people. He didn't just teach grammar. He told his students stories about the world, about the people he met, about dreams. Every lesson carried one quiet belief: if others can do it, why can't we? When the word internet first reached China, Jack Ma was nearly 30. He didn't understand technology, couldn't code, and had never even touched a real computer. But when he saw the word appear on a screen for the first time, his heart raced. He knew instantly this would be the bridge that connects China to the world. Just like those foggy mornings on his bike, Jack once again saw a door to the future and decided to walk through it, even if no one else dared. Perhaps it was those hard, hungry years that gave him a unique kind of courage, the kind born from having nothing left to lose. He once said, "If you're born poor, it's not your fault, but if you die poor, it is." It wasn't just a quote, it was a vow. So when the world still doubted, he began to build, not with money, not with technical skills, but with faith, the only resource the poor understand better than anyone else. By the late 1990s, China was transforming. Concrete buildings rose over dusty streets, but the internet was still a foreign word to most. While the country struggled to catch up with the modern world, a small man in Hangzhou dreamed of connecting every Chinese business to the global marketplace through the web. In a cramped apartment on Hubin Road, Alibaba was born. 18 people sat around an old wooden table. None were tech experts, none had capital, none had a clear business plan, but they shared one thing no bank could offer: unshakable faith in Jack Ma's vision. He told them, "We don't need to be the best at technology. We just need to understand people and believe in the future." And they did believe, because in Jack's eyes burned the kind of fire that sees what the world has yet to imagine. Alibaba was born from a simple mission: to help small Chinese businesses sell their products to the world. In the beginning, their office had only a few old computers, flickering internet connections, and a dream. Jack Ma spent countless nights hunched over a keyboard, sending cold emails to foreign companies, introducing a strange new platform no one had ever heard of. Most never replied. Some thought it was a scam. But Jack didn't stop. He believed that once people truly understood the power of the internet, everything would change forever. Then came the year 2000. The dot-com bubble burst, erasing hundreds of tech startups overnight. Panic spread like wildfire. Founders fled, investors disappeared, and even some of Alibaba's earliest believers began to walk away. But Jack remained calm. He gathered his weary team and told them, "If we survive the next 3 years, Alibaba will become a legend. If we don't, at least we dared to dream." That one sentence became their anchor in the storm. Miraculously, when the dust settled, Alibaba was still standing. The difference was clear. Jack Ma wasn't selling products, he was selling belief. He wasn't chasing technology, he was empowering people. In a country where business had always relied on handshakes and face-to-face trust, Jack taught China to believe in electronic transactions. He turned the internet into a bridge connecting millions of small merchants to the global marketplace. Success followed. Alibaba grew from a modest startup into a rising empire. In 2003, Taobao was born, China's answer to eBay. When eBay entered the Chinese market with overwhelming confidence and deep pockets, Jack simply smiled. "eBay is a shark in the ocean," he said. "We are a crocodile in the Yangtze River. If we fight in the ocean, we lose. But in the river, we win." And he did. By 2014, Alibaba went public on the New York Stock Exchange, raising an astonishing $25 billion, the largest IPO in human history at the time. As the stock ticker flashed red across the giant digital board, the world watched a man who had once earned $12 a month as an English teacher, now standing on Wall Street in a perfectly tailored suit, smiling like someone who had finally proven his worth to the universe. From a humble classroom in Hangzhou to the grand stage of global finance, Jack Ma became the face of the new Chinese dream. He showed the world that greatness doesn't come from privilege, it comes from persistence, courage, and a vision others are too afraid to see. Alibaba wasn't just a company, it was a declaration that China could create, innovate, and lead. That night, as Wall Street glowed in celebration, Jack Ma looked up at the giant screen, the red numbers reflecting in his eyes. What shone there wasn't triumph, it was a question. Is this the peak, or just the beginning of something far more dangerous? He didn't know it yet, but from that moment on, every step he took would carry him closer to the place where even the brightest light can turn into the cruelest trap. In the years that followed, Jack Ma's name became larger than life. In China, people called him the man who made a nation believe in the internet. In the West, the media hailed him as the Steve Jobs of Asia. Bold, eccentric, magnetic. He appeared everywhere. The World Economic Forum in Davos, interviews with Elon Musk and Barack Obama, viral clips of his speeches spreading across the internet. Whenever Jack Ma took the stage, the room erupted in applause. His English was accented, but his words, witty, confident, philosophical, cut straight to the heart. He had become more than a billionaire entrepreneur. He was an icon of self-belief. To millions of young Chinese, he embodied a new kind of energy, the hunger to be different, to dream big, to fail and rise again. "If you haven't fallen at least 100 times," he once said, "you don't know what it means to begin." At that moment, Jack Ma was a national hero. With nothing but vision and determination, he had carried China into the era of e-commerce. But light always casts a shadow. The higher you rise, the easier it is to forget how small you once were. Jack began to believe he could speak about anything: business, society, morality, even the soul of a nation. People didn't just listen because he was rich. They listened because he said what others couldn't. Then the words that once lifted him began to burn him. At a gathering of young entrepreneurs, Jack declared, "Working 9 to 9:60 is a blessing," referring to China's brutal work culture of 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. He meant it as motivation, but to millions of exhausted workers, it sounded like mockery. Social media exploded. People asked, has Jack Ma forgotten where he came from? Has he lost touch with the people who once looked up to him? That question, quiet at first, would soon echo across the entire nation. From a beloved national icon, Jack Ma was slowly becoming a target. Every word he spoke, every smile he made, was now under a microscope. State newspapers began mentioning him with a cautious tone. Yet Jack didn't stop. To him, honesty was a form of courage. "I don't want to stay silent just to stay safe," he once said. "I want to speak the truth, even if it gets me into trouble." But sometimes the line between what's right and what should be said is thinner than a breath. One sentence can change a man's destiny. Jack Ma didn't realize that once you become a national symbol, your words no longer belong to you alone. They carry the weight of a system, a nation, and millions of people who listen. And then came that fateful night in Shanghai. He would walk onto the stage, hold a microphone, smile as he always did, and speak words that would shake the world. That wasn't the Jack Ma of old, the humble English teacher who once told his students to dream big. This was Jack Ma, the mogul, the visionary, the man who believed too deeply in his own truth. He didn't know that in that very moment, as his speech began, the wheel of fate had already started to turn, not toward another triumph, but toward the abyss known as the price of truth. The hall was packed that night. Golden light flooded the stage, painting Jack's face with a glow that made him look both radiant and strangely distant. Hundreds of reporters, bankers, and investors filled the seats. On the front row sat some of China's most powerful financial figures, watching silently. Jack Ma stepped forward. His smile was calm, his tone steady. "The world is changing," he began, "and China needs a financial system built for the future, not the past." The words hung in the air. A quiet ripple passed through the audience. He didn't stop. He went on to criticize the traditional banking system, calling it outdated, rigid, run like pawn shops. He said they lacked creativity, misunderstood young people, and were holding back the nation's growth. Each sentence sliced through years of carefully preserved order. No one had ever dared say such things publicly, especially not someone who controlled one of the most influential tech empires in the country. The hall fell into dead silence. A few coughs, the faint sound of pens scratching on notepads. Jack Ma kept smiling, but his smile carried a flicker of defiance, as if he knew he was lighting the fuse of a storm and had already accepted the cost. The applause at the end was brief, hesitant. As he stepped off stage, a friend leaned over and whispered, "You went too far tonight." Jack just smiled. Someone has to say it. But within hours, that speech had spread across the internet. The video was shared millions of times. Some praised him. Jack Ma said what everyone knows but no one dares to say. Others warned, he just challenged the entire system. Then, the unimaginable happened. 3 days later, the historic Ant Group IPO, valued at $37 billion, was suddenly suspended. The largest public offering in world history vanished overnight. No warning, no official statement, just a cold, bureaucratic line. Further risk assessment required. Panic swept the markets. Millions of investors scrambled. Analysts called it the most abrupt economic break in modern history. And at the center of it all, Jack Ma said nothing. He vanished. No interviews, no appearances. His photos and videos quietly disappeared from Chinese social media platforms. Once, a single quote from him could ignite a nation. Now, there was only silence. Rumors filled the void. Some said he was under internal review. Others claimed he'd been banned from speaking publicly. A few whispered that he'd left China altogether. Meanwhile, Alibaba, his creation, his life's work, came under a wave of government investigations and tighter regulations. The world was stunned. The Financial Times described it as a shadow falling over the Alibaba empire. CNN asked, "Where is Jack Ma?" In China, no one dared to ask out loud, but everyone already knew. There are lines that even the brightest minds cannot cross. From that point on, this was no longer just a story about business. It had become a parable about power, control, and the invisible cost of truth. The man who once symbolized innovation and free thought had disappeared into silence. And in that silence, the world began to hear the most haunting sound of all, the echo of truth being buried alive. Jack Ma, once a man the world admired, had become little more than a name wrapped in rumors and uncertainty. Somewhere, far from the cameras and the spotlight, he was perhaps sitting alone, looking back at it all, wondering to himself, did I speak too soon? Or has the world simply grown too afraid to listen? For months, time seemed to fall into a nameless silence. Jack Ma disappeared. No images, no speeches, not even a trace. For someone who once stood at the very center of global attention, that silence felt like a kind of death. Speculation spread like wildfire. Some claimed he was under house arrest. Others said he had chosen to withdraw, to weather the storm in solitude. Western media went further, suggesting he might have been sent to a re-education program for entrepreneurs. But whatever the truth was, no one really knew. They were only echoes in the dark. Meanwhile, Alibaba had to go on. The empire once built on dreams of freedom now moved within tighter boundaries than ever before. Subsidiaries were audited. Investments were restricted. Bold projects were quietly shelved. The young executives who once followed Jack Ma's mantra of think big, act differently, had learned to speak cautiously, follow procedure, and avoid all possible risks. Jack Ma no longer appeared on grand stages speaking about the future of the internet. Instead, the world began to see him in rare glimpses, visiting farms, chatting with students, attending small conferences abroad. He smiled more, spoke less, and stayed away from politics and finance. It seemed that, after everything, he had chosen a different way to exist, not as a pioneer, but as an observer. One April morning the following year, Jack Ma appeared again, in Tokyo. He wore a simple shirt and strolled through a university campus. His hair was streaked with gray, his smile was gentle, yet his eyes carried the quiet exhaustion of a man who had gone too far. When a reporter asked, "Do you still believe in your old ideals?" Jack paused for a long moment before answering, "My faith hasn't changed, only the way I express it has. I still believe in the future, but now I understand. Sometimes, silence protects it better than words." The quote spread across social media like a sigh. People realized Jack Ma was no longer the symbol of defiant confidence. He had become a lesson instead. That freedom, without limits, can turn into the very fire that burns the one who holds the torch. The world kept spinning, technology advanced, new faces emerged. But no one could truly replace Jack Ma because he wasn't just a businessman, he was a story of ambition, belief, and the price of courage. One afternoon, in a quiet conversation with a group of students in Hangzhou, Jack Ma shared an old memory. "When I founded Alibaba, I thought that even if I failed, I wouldn't regret it, because I had tried. Now, I feel the same. If I must stay silent, at least I know I once had the courage to speak." The room fell silent. A student asked, "If you could go back, would you say it differently?" Jack smiled, his eyes distant. "Maybe I would still say it. But I'd say it in a way that makes people want to listen, not fear to." And perhaps that was his final transformation. The man who once believed truth alone could change the world had learned that the world also runs on invisible boundaries of power and belief. That evening, golden sunlight fell across the old rooftops of Hangzhou, where it had all begun. Jack Ma stood watching the crowd flow by, his figure small against the city he helped shape. There were no stages now, no applause, no spotlights. Just a man, once a legend, once broken by his own dream, standing quietly, smiling faintly, finally at peace. And somewhere, in that silence, you could almost hear an echo from the past. The world needs those who dare to dream, but sometimes those who dare to be silent are the strongest of all. The summer of 2023 brought heavy rain to Hangzhou, more than usual. For 3 days and nights, the monsoon washed away the heat of June, wrapping the city in a soft, cool mist. In a small villa by West Lake, Jack Ma sat by the window, holding a cup of Longjing tea, eyes following the ripples across the water. No more ringing phones, no urgent meetings, no flights across continents, only the sound of rain and the slow ticking of a clock that seemed to move out of respect for his stillness. On the desk lay a document titled New Direction, Smart Agriculture. Not technology, not finance. Agriculture. Something he once dismissed as too small to change the world. But now he believed that it was from such small things that balance could be restored after so much upheaval. He began traveling across China's countryside, from Yunnan to Guizhou, Anhui to Sichuan. No bodyguards, no entourage, just a few close friends and a couple of suitcases. The villagers often didn't recognize him. They saw only a thin, quiet man who asked careful questions about crops, soil, and irrigation systems. And when they finally realized who he was, they were too stunned to speak. Jack would only smile and say, "Now I'm your student." Foreign media began writing about him again, but this time, the tone had changed. The Economist called him a reborn entrepreneur. Bloomberg wrote, "Jack Ma is redefining success, not by power, but by peace." In China, the press mentioned his name again, carefully, respectfully, as if speaking of someone who had made mistakes but earned redemption through humility. In a rare interview, a journalist asked him, "What made you return after all that happened?" Jack Ma was silent for a while before replying softly, "I once wanted to change the world. Now I just want to understand it a little better. When you no longer wish to defeat anyone, that's when you're truly free." The words spread across the internet like a quiet awakening, not as the rallying cry of a hero, but as the reflection of a man who had walked through glory, power, and solitude. That evening, he walked through the old street in Hangzhou, the very place where Alibaba was born. The small building had become a gleaming tech center now, lit with bright LED lights. He looked up at the familiar logo and smiled. There was no pride in his eyes, only gratitude. "I was here once," he thought, "and that's enough." A group of college students spotted him and hurried over, asking for a photo. One of them, a young man, eyes bright with ambition, asked, "Mr. Jack, if we want to start our own business, what's the most important thing?" Jack Ma looked at them, his eyes soft with warmth and experience. "Don't start a business just to become rich," he said gently. "Start to discover your own value. Because when the world takes everything away from you, fame, money, power, that value will be the only thing left." The group fell silent. A breeze carried the faint scent of osmanthus through the air. Jack Ma turned and walked away, his small frame fading into the crowd. No cameras, no stage, no applause, but for him, it was perhaps the freest, truest, and most beautiful moment of his life. And so, the man who once shook the world with nothing but his bare hands chose a humble ending for himself, planting trees, teaching, working in agriculture, and sharing stories of dreams with the next generation. Not so they would idolize him, but so they would understand. No success comes without a price. No freedom exists without cost. And no light lasts forever unless it knows how to bow before the dark. That night, wind swept across West Lake. Jack Ma looked up at the starry sky and smiled faintly. Perhaps in the end, he had not lost at all. He had simply found another way to win, by living peacefully in the very world that once brought him to his knees. By the fall of 2025, Hangzhou was glowing with the red leaves of autumn. The air was crisp, calm, a far cry from the years when people were used to seeing Jack Ma on grand stages under blinding lights. Now he was only occasionally spotted riding a bicycle around West Lake or sitting quietly in a small tea house watching people pass by. No one called him the richest man in China anymore. They called him something simpler, Teacher Ma. It was a title given by the students at the private school he had founded. A place not meant to train entrepreneurs, but to teach young people how to become humans with free hearts. There were no lessons about profit or investment strategy, only conversations about courage, empathy, and the ability to see the world with gratitude. Jack Ma wore plain cotton clothes. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of truth. He told stories, about failure, about faith, about the times when he nearly lost everything. "You know," he once said to his class, his voice low and steady, "there are things more important than money. It's the strength to stand back up when the whole world turns its back on you." The classroom went silent. In that moment, the man who once stirred the global economy felt more like a storyteller than a legend. When evening came and the children went home, Jack Ma often stayed behind, tending to the small garden behind the school. He planted tea trees, bamboo, and wild chrysanthemums. "Tea keeps my mind calm. Bamboo reminds me to stay steadfast. And the wildflowers. They remind me that beauty exists even when no one's watching," he once told a Japanese journalist. From time to time, invitations still arrived. Davos, Singapore Tech Forum, Global AI Summit. But Jack Ma rarely showed up. His reply was always the same: "I've spoken too much in my life. Now, it's time to listen." Ironically, it was that very silence that made people respect him more than ever. Because in a noisy world full of competing voices, Jack Ma's quiet had the weight of wisdom. No one asked what went wrong anymore. They understood. He hadn't failed. He had simply gone further than his time could follow. One late October afternoon, Jack Ma received a letter from a former student, a young man who had once attended one of his talks. The letter read, "Dear Teacher Jack, I used to think success meant having a lot of money, but after hearing you speak, I decided to teach in the mountains. I don't earn much, but every day I feel that my life has meaning. I understand now. You didn't lose anything. You just changed the way you win." Jack Ma read the letter quietly, sitting still for a long time. Then, he placed it inside a small wooden box, the same one that held notes and messages sent to him over the years. The box wasn't locked. He once said, "I'm not afraid of losing it. These things only matter when they're shared." That night, he stepped outside and looked up at the Hangzhou sky, bright with stars. In the dim light, his face was calm, serene, no longer an entrepreneur, no longer a reformer, no longer a symbol, just a man, small, simple, but completely free. He whispered softly, as if speaking to himself, "Maybe when we let go of the dream of power, we finally touch the real meaning of a dream." And then he smiled, the same smile that once inspired millions across the world. But this time, it wasn't the confident smile of a man on stage. It was the quiet peace of someone who had lived through ambition, failure, and awakening, and finally found clarity. The next morning, the news was brief. Jack Ma officially launches the Global Education Fund to support rural students and sustainable agricultural research. No headlines, no grand ceremony, just a short note on his school's website. The best seeds don't need the spotlight. They only need good soil to grow, and that's how Jack Ma's story came to an end, not with applause, but with perfect stillness. Because in the end, every empire fades, every name loses its shine, but faith, when planted in the right soil, lives on. And somewhere, among the old bamboo by the lake, the man who once shook the world still sits quietly, sipping tea, his gaze distant, but peaceful. He has nothing left to prove, nothing left to fear. Only one truth remains: Jack Ma, a man who crossed every boundary, only to discover that the greatest victory in life is learning to live in peace with yourself.